Hello, my name is Brent Kaur, and this is the story of my struggles as a Christian who has same sex attractions. So, starting from the beginning, as a kid, I had a lot of really negative influences just around the house and the neighborhood and at school, and eventually I found out that those things would later play a part in my generating same sex attractions. The three main things that cause homosexuality, particularly in men, are failure to emotionally connect to the same sex parent. So that can be from neglect, abandonment, abuse, lots of different stuff. So the second thing is like an overly close emotional attachment to the opposite sex parent, often resulting in their identities melding together. And last of which is sexual abuse. So sometimes you'll get some combination of these, but if somebody has all three, then to one degree or another, they're almost guaranteed to have same sex attractions. I have all three. So I had a lot of trouble with my dad growing up, and um, just as a disclaimer at the very beginning here, I'm not going to throw any of my family members or abusers under the bus. I'm not here to just call people to account. Um, this is just going to be very basic details to give you an idea of what happened and why. So, my father was an abusive alcoholic, and that took its toll for a really long time, but the result of our relationship never really being close was I saw what I thought manhood was. I saw what I thought a man was. And that was my father. And I made a decision very, very early on, not a conscious decision, but deep inside, that that was never something I wanted to be. So from the very beginning, you have that split off from the identity and the design that I was made for into something else, something less. And so the next factor involved was after my dad left when I was 10. My mom had a lot of deep emotional brokenness and need, and I was the, quiet, sensitive, loving young kid who just tried to help in any way I could. So ultimately, I started picking up a lot of that emotional baggage, which definitely caused a fair amount of damage early on. Um, and then the third factor was I had a neighbor at the time who, when I couldn't look to my dad as an influence for masculinity and for affirming my own identity, I went to my across the street neighbor who was a couple years older than me. And the result was a lot of verbal and physical abuse, a lot of emotional, a lot of going to him for identity and instead being constantly reminded that I was weaker and inferior. And I got a message from a lot of our interactions that essentially, you're not like me, you're not a man, and you never will be because you're weak and you'll always be weak. So that message carried deeply into the rest of my life as I generated same sex attractions when I hit puberty when I was around 10. And a lot of my attractions were based around the chest and, like, very male symbolism is having a big chest. And that neighbor definitely he had that going on for him. And so that was a huge fixation for me, is that comparison, constantly physical comparison, which is why you see a lot of trying to get super jacked and be desirable in the gay community, because it's at least an outward symbol of masculinity when there isn't one on the inside. When you don't get the developmental blocks in your male identity from the same sex parent, and then you start to surround your identity on the opposite sex parent, then you can, when you hit puberty, generate same sex attractions, because it's not even really a sexual attraction. There's such a misunderstanding there. you, up until you hit puberty, are just looking for guys who exemplify the missing pieces of your development. They have some piece of, of your need that was never met and that was never built, and you instinctively go to them for it. It's why homosexuality is often described as cannibalism, is because you're trying to control or receive those qualities that you don't feel you have within yourself from someone else. And so my comparison and my just asinine search for masculinity in the physical led to me becoming super addicted to working out. It led to me becoming just incredibly self-conscious, and lots of self-hatred comes out of this as well. So I understood that I wasn't what I was supposed to be, that I didn't understand how to become what everyone else seemed to be. And so from a very early age, with these missing pieces, I was bullied heavily and was never really part of any solid guy friend groups, because on some level people can sense that you're missing what makes a man a man. And that immaturity and that rejection and the abuse and pain that I'd suffered for so many years eventually just made me angry and violent and hateful. And around the time that I was 11, I started having an addiction to pornography. Strangely enough, for maybe a week or two, it was heterosexual, but then, pretty quickly that wasn't enough, and it didn't seem to fit with what I was after. And so eventually things changed. And from that point on, it went pretty downhill, because that connection of, this is what a man is, what I'm looking at right here, and why don't I see that in me? Why am I not big and strong? Why am I not, this outward image of something that I instinctively know at least resembles a part of masculinity, but I don't know how to reconcile the lack of it within myself. And so that drove my addiction, and that fierce comparison drove me to use and objectify any, guy who could have been a solid friend in my life, and be afraid of having any close friendships, because, growing up as a Christian, I understood that homosexuality was not what God intended for us, but I had no one to tell, and I had no framework to view all of this in. I mean, I didn't learn anything I'm talking about right now until I was in college, so I had no frame of reference for that entire time. I just thought I was a monster, and I thought I was a pervert. And I thought that all of the abuse and the hatred that people were pouring into me, I deserved, because I had done something wrong, or I was wrong. And I spent all of that time searching for a way to completely eradicate my same-sex attractions and completely deny that I was gay. And that went on for a really long time, and it caused a lot of deep psychological damage, and it just seemed to be reinforcing all of those broken lessons I had learned early on in life from my father, from my mother, from my neighbor. And that went on until God started to put a stop to it. But that wasn't until my freshman year of college, when I had a vision of all these repressed memories in my past that revealed some of the source memories of my same-sex attractions. And, I've already described a lot of that. But from that point on, I made the decision to figure out what to do with all that information, and to have a real living relationship with the God of the universe, who was offering me that information for the purpose of healing me and changing me. And I understood that then. It was still a fairly elementary understanding, but as I went on, I read books like The Broken Image by Leanne Payne. What else? Growth into Manhood. Let's see. I'll put a reading list in the description for this video, just because there were a lot of books that were extremely influential to my original growth out of same-sex attraction, and I think they could be helpful to you too. But I started to understand the concept of it being cannibalism of qualities that we don't possess, and it being just a fundamental immaturity of our male identities. And pornography made that so much worse because it gave me the only picture of human sexuality I ever had was in a homosexual context. And the deep shame and self-hatred that reaffirmed, what I had been told to believe about myself for my entire life, all of these just insidious lies. It was incredibly damaging. It is incredibly damaging. But finally, I realized the truth. And it's not as complicated as one might think. A part of that truth is that I'm gay. I have same-sex attractions. God did not make me that way. I was not born that way. There's no gene. But it happens. I've listed the things that cause that particular issue, and it happens to way more of us than it should, with abusive absentee fathers and just broken households and sexual abuse being rampant, and then pornography being introduced at younger and younger ages throughout larger and larger percentages of the population. I mean, it's an epidemic, and so little information is being put out there. I had to scrounge all of this up myself and never get any help, never have anyone who could walk through this with me or teach me what to do or how to heal. I mean, it was an absolute miracle of God that, one, I never acted on it. I never slept with any other guys. And two, that I knew from the beginning that it was not supposed to be a part of me. I can't explain it. I instinctively knew from the beginning, because even though I was raised in a Christian home, it was a Christian home. I didn't have a great understanding of any of this. And then when I did finally tell my parents, they didn't really know how to handle it. And my dad was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." And, in the meantime, I was just absolutely steeped in self-hatred and this idea that I was some kind of monster, but I had no way to frame that. And now I know that I'm not a monster, that being gay does not make me a pervert or, this terrible thing, that my years of acting out with homosexual pornography did not make me into some unlovable, unforgivable thing. I mean, despite the fact that people had treated me wrongly pretty much my entire life, it was not a reflection of who I am. And I spent a very long time trying to completely erase my same-sex attractions, and that was the wrong move. I didn't understand that even though I'm not born this way, and God purposefully allowed the circumstances that led to me becoming like this for a reason. And I believe that reason was so that he could offer me healing and change, and I could tell other people about what he's done and that it's possible. That freshman year of college, I went to a program with the Navigators at the University of Northern Colorado, and I went there with an express goal to understand what to do about my same-sex attractions, to lift it up to God, and to experience some kind of a healing. And that's exactly what happened. I started that program having told no one that I was gay. I ended that program having been attracted to a woman for the first time in my life, having generated genuine, intimate male friendships that had no trace of anything inappropriate. They were totally centered around Jesus, and they were amazingly transformative for me. Having given up the idea that being straight was the goal, but pursuing Christ and pursuing holiness being my new goal. And then on the last church service of that program, getting up in front of everyone in our group, everyone in one of the other groups, everyone we'd invited, and sharing my testimony and sharing the origins in same-sex attraction. And I actually had some gay and lesbian people come up afterwards to talk to me about it, and it was beautiful. It's been amazing. I mean, since that day, God has provided me an amazing healing in my life as I heal from more and more of the trauma and more of the difficulty and the pain that caused these things. I'm slowly reawakening my heterosexual identity. I'm slowly regaining my God honoring, God-centered male identity as a man of God. And just what a far cry from who I thought I was and how I was living. I mean, it's completely different and it is so much better. And I went from being 100% attracted to men to probably around 45% at this point, but we're still working. I mean, again, straightness is not the goal. Pursuing a loving, open, honest relationship with Jesus Christ where I realize that, he accepts me, that he loves me, and that this doesn't change his mind about me for 1 minute. Like, that's, so many of us need to hear that you are deeply loved, you are deeply valued, and all of the guilt and the shame and the self-hatred is wrong. But it's not wrong because Christians have told you that you're wrong, but actually you're right. And it's not wrong because you're some kind of, terrible thing. Like, it's wrong because there's an idea out there that it takes courage and bravery to accept this as your whole identity. And I'm here to say that it's exactly the opposite. I mean, the whole MO that we have is to cover up our brokenness and our pain and our emptiness with sex and with homosexual relationships and with saying, I'm super proud of this and this is great and this is awesome. We all know it's not. Nobody talks about how as soon as you age out, you're essentially useless in the gay community. Not to mention the fact that the actual process of homosexual sex among men not only is fueled by hatred and rage, but it also physically does not line up with how our bodies are designed. And after years and years of anal sex, it destroys the lining of your intestines, and you can end up with a colostomy bag. I mean, nobody's talking about the dark side of living this deep, empty existence, extremely high suicide rates, high substance abuse rates. Like, our community wouldn't be deteriorating from the inside if this was something to applaud. I mean, it's terrible, and no one wants to admit it because in order to admit that it's terrible, you have to admit that you need to change, and change is just terribly difficult. I mean, it's painful because you have to admit that you didn't ask for this, but we've made the decision to live it out. That's on us. And there is freedom for this, and there is healing, and there is hope. But you have to exchange the lie for the truth, and that truth is that Jesus Christ made us to be men and women of God and to reflect himself. And just like anyone else who struggles with sin, I mean, a heterosexual individual who struggles with lust still shouldn't be looking at pornography, still should not be committing adultery, still should not be objectifying and using people. I mean, it's not just a gay issue, it's a human issue. And the sooner you realize that it's not taboo and it's not some special thing, the sooner you can realize that Christ came to die for everyone's sins of all kinds, that no one is beyond forgiveness, that no one is beyond his reach, and that there is hope, and that there is truth and healing, and that you can be a part of that, It doesn't have to be one side versus another. It doesn't have to be Christians versus homosexuals. It doesn't have to be, so full of hate. There's enough pain. There's enough hatred. There's enough diversity, diversity isn't what I'm looking for. Division. There we go. Ultimately, it requires taking responsibility for our own healing and our own pain and the emptiness inside. And everyone has to do that, not just us. So I hope I leave you with an understanding that Christians and God and the Bible and, none of that points to hating homosexuals. And none of that points to judging and condemning and doing all of the horrible, horrible things that have been done. That's not the God of the Bible. That's not my Jesus. But it does call us to accountability. It does call us to truth. It does call us to face our own mistakes, as well as to forgive the mistakes of others that have put us in this position. God has worked an incredible story in my life to have forgiven both of my parents and my neighbor, and to actively have a relationship with both parents despite everything that happened. I mean, I haven't gone into even, a hundredth of the detail on those things, and nor do I need to, because suffice it to say that those healings of those relationships and those things that caused me to be gay in the first place, now that I'm receiving those healings, I'm becoming less and less attracted to men. I'm becoming less and less full of rage. I'm becoming less and less full of self-hatred. And I'm healing as a person. And anyone can do that. You just have to make the difficult decision of facing these things instead of running away with addiction and promiscuity and turning your anger and hatred outward towards the people who are convicting and are calling out the wrong. And ultimately, a living and active relationship with the God of the universe is the only thing that can lead to true healing in this area. So, as always, the choice is ours. I have made mine, and I encourage you all to make yours. With love, God bless.